So I'll let you kick it off if you want to go ahead and get us started.
Ready to get started?
Yes. If you want to
Yeah, I'll start it off.
have your camera on, I guess, during your talking, if we could.
Are you ready? Okay, we'll start this meeting. I'd like to welcome everyone to this virtual public meeting for the Assunpink Creek Watershed Dam number 8, also called Robert Martin Lake. I'm Rich Williams, I'm the municipal engineer, and at this time I'm going to ask Peter Massaput to actually give the information and the explanation of the team software and what our meeting protocol is.
Sounds good. So good evening to everyone. So those who were able to join us, welcome. And I just wanted to go over a couple of things that were noted in the invitation, and that will help us to facilitate the meeting and make sure that there are no interruptions. So if you could please mute yourselves. We will provide an opportunity to ask questions at the end of the meeting. You can once the meeting or just before the meeting is over, you can utilize the meeting chat tool that will and write your question using the tool. The other option is that at the end of the meeting you can use the raise your hand option in the Teams meeting as well, and we'll then know who has raised their hand, and we will be able to call you out, and you will be able to present your question. If anybody has any questions regarding this, feel free to ask me now. I'll try to answer it as much as I can. All right. I hear none. So then we can probably proceed with the meeting. Wait.
Okay, I think it will be Rich and then Dave Lamb on the agenda.
Okay. Let me come back in here. Okay, again, I'm the municipal engineer for the Township of Hamilton. We are the sponsor and of the dam, and let me just give you a real quick, and I'm going to leave most of the details to our presenters because they have very good information for you. This is the public session. The dam was built roughly 40, 50 years ago, and the bottom line is it basically is in need of rehabilitation based on the report that came back from ADEP. So we're going to hear more information about what's been done, what was done, and to give our role as the township's involvement is we're responsible or would be responsible for federal government would be providing 65% of the funding. We would be providing 35% of the funding of the construction costs, and that would be determined on what alternative they decide on how to rehabilitate the dam so it meets the probable maximum precipitation.
Followed by pound.
A little bit further. So
to continue in English, press 1. To continue in English, press 1.
Okay, thank you. I'll press 2. And so I'll turn it over to Wade.
Welcome to the audio conferencing center. Please enter a conference ID followed by pound.
I'm sorry, Dave. Dave, you're next on the agenda here. So, Dave, if you want to pick up from this point, maybe give in your part.
Okay, thank you very much, Rich. I just want to say Hamilton Township and NRCS's working relationship goes back many years, as Rich had mentioned. The dam was originally planned back in the early 60s as a part of the Assunpink Creek watershed project. The focus of the project was looking at flooding issues in Hamilton Township, also in the city of Trenton. And the dam in Veterans Park was originally constructed as a flood control dam. It was one of 8 within that watershed project. Project also includes about 2 miles of flood control channel along Pond Run, and that serves Hamilton Township as well. With the installation of the dam and the channel in Hamilton Township, NRCS and the township entered into a long-term operation and maintenance agreement, and that has kept us tied together over the years. So about, I guess, 4 or 5 years ago, the town had to update its emergency action plan for the dam. And in doing so, there were some safety issues that were noted by the state dam safety section. They were brought to the attention of the township, who then, because of our long-term relationship, came to us and asked if we could provide them assistance in addressing the issues that have been raised. And our first step in that process is to conduct an assessment of the dam. So actually we had the Mercer County Soil Conservation District do that assessment for us. And as a result, they confirmed the safety issues, and also they determined that to address those issues, the measures would be eligible for assistance through the NRCS's watershed rehabilitation program. So the next step was the township applied to that program for planning assistance funding. And in 2018, they were approved for that funding. And we looked whether we could provide that assistance, we had the staff available, or whether we'd need to bring expertise in to assist us. So at that time, we reached out to a Terra Schnabel, a consulting firm, and entered into a contract with them to provide us assistance through this process. They have a full range of planning expertise, which we do not currently have on our staff in New Jersey. So they've been a real asset to this process. Tonight, we're going to go over the status of the planning effort, where things stand to date. They'll fill you in on that in their presentations. Also, at the end, we're going to open it up for public comment, and we're really interested in hearing the public input and answer any questions that you might have about the project. And so with that, I'll conclude my remarks and turn it back over to Peter, I believe.
I think actually it's coming over to me, Dave, and I am Wade Biddix, and I am retired from the Natural Resources Conservation Service with about 34 years of service, and most of that was in the Water Resources Program. And I am joined tonight by myself and Peter Massapust with Terra Solutions, and I'm trying to get control here, and with Paul Wella. So I'm trying to go back up. Here we go. Okay, here we go. Sorry about that. So I'm joined tonight by Peter Massapust and Paul Wella. We'll be presenting for our team. We are part of an interdisciplinary planning team that has worked on this project since May of last year. And we bring collectively many years of experience. So I think we know what is needed and understand what the state and federal requirements are for the rehabilitation of these types of dams. And we've been gathering and analyzing this dam, like I said, since May of last year. So what we're going to be doing tonight, and hopefully everyone can see the PowerPoint presentation, but we'll be going through this. There's about 80 some slides. It's pretty chock full of technical information. There are some pictures and details about the watershed, and then specifically about this dam, the Assunpink Dam number 8. But the meeting will be recorded, or is being recorded, and the PowerPoint will be posted to the town's website so that anyone wants to later reference that, or folks that have not been able to participate tonight can also key in and view that also. So we prefer to do these meetings in person, but could not at this time. So hopefully this virtual meeting will provide a lot of the information and help out with what is needed to get us to move forward with this project. So sit back, relax, take a few notes. Has been mentioned, there'll be ample time at the end for questions, and it's your meeting. So, but I think we might answer a lot of the questions you may have as we go through the presentation. So we do want to hold the questions and answers to the end. But if you do want to jot down something, you can go to the chat room and jot your questions down, and or you'll be able to raise your hand later and we'll get to your questions. So with nothing further, I'll move right on into this. Tonight's objectives. We'll summarize the National Dam Rehab Program very briefly and review some planning activities to date, the basic information on the dam, the scope or the limitations or sideboards of the rehab project on this dam, the findings to date, the alternatives that have been analyzed and evaluated. We'll talk about the recommended alternative. It has not been finalized yet, but into what we would call a preferred alternative, but at least it's recommended. And then we'll talk about the consequences and effects of that recommended alternative. We will have ample opportunity for input and contributions by others. As been mentioned, the key players in the planning process, we have 6 actual local sponsors of the overall Assunpink Creek watershed. The Hamilton Township is the lead for this particular dam, but there are also Mercer County Soil Conservation District, Freehold Soil Conservation District, and Mercer and Monmouth County, and the New Jersey Department of Environmental Protection. They're all active participants in the as sponsors of this project. I'm going to cut my mic off so I'm not distracting to you, or my camera off instead. The technical support comes out of the NRCS staff in New Jersey, and the technical contractors are from Terra Solutions, Snobble Engineering, EA Engineering, Science and Technology, and ERM. So we have quite an interdisciplinary team here and a group of people that have been working on this dam. The dam rehab program back many years ago in the 1940s, the federal government started this small watershed program. Since that time, about almost 12,000 dams nationwide have been built with this program, or different programs. Rehabilitation defined would be to extend the service life of the dams and meet safety and performance standards, prolong the original life, replace any deteriorating components, repairs after catastrophic events, upgrade to meet dam safety laws, or potentially to take them out and remove the dams altogether. The only dams that are eligible for rehabilitation under these programs are those originally built with either the Soil Conservation Service, which transformed into the Natural Resources Conservation Service within the U.S. Department of Agriculture. The rehab planning process and implementation process is to, as Dave mentioned, an application, a site assessment, and risk analysis, a ranking of those applications, and then hopefully funding, and you move into the project planning and onto the design and construction. So we're well into this process, and hopefully we'll be able to complete a plan in the near future. The cost share, Rich mentioned this a little bit, but to bring out the details, USDA Natural Resources Conservation Service funds 100% of the planning costs. So all these planning costs are federally funding, and 100% of design cost, and then 65% of the total project cost, and that's not to exceed 100% of the construction cost. So all of NRCS staff costs are paid 100% by NRCS. And the local sponsors, the funds are 35%, and that can be cash or in-kind credit. The only thing they have to pay up front without federal assistance are the permit costs. Just so that we're all on the same page and talking about dams, I wanted to cover a little bit here. I wish I had a pointer, but this thing will not allow me to have a pointer. A typical earthen dam, the impoundment is basically the reservoir or the permanent water that's out there. You have a riser with a trash rack normally, and then you have an embankment, a berm, an outlet, and an emergency spillway. The emergency spillway is basically the safety notch around the dam so that the dam does not overtop in storm events. Here's another example of that, another depiction of that, just a typical cross section with your, on the middle of the left side. The sediment storage is your basically normal pool. That's the area that would have your normal reservoir water. And then you have the flood storage that's up to the crest of the auxiliary spillway. And then top of dam, you do not want the dam to overtop the embankment. Then you have a principal spillway pipe that goes through the embankment and exits and outlets downstream. So that's what we're talking about. This is Assunpink Dam number 8 is a very typical type flood control project or structure. As far as hazard classes of dams, the risk on the left is the risk goes up, the class of the dam goes up. So it's A, B, C, with A being the low hazard, with failure primarily impacting ag lands or rural areas. Class B or significant hazard dams would cause some infrastructure damage and loss, but Class C, a high hazard dam, would basically cause a potential loss of life during a breach. So this dam is classified as a high hazard dam. Some of the statistics on the dam, it's known as the Robert G. Martin Lake, located on Pond Run, built in '67 as a single-purpose flood control dam. Some of these dams are built with other purposes such as water supply or recreation or irrigation water, things like that. Drainage area is 1,914 acres, or about almost 3 square miles, with 13 acres of surface pool. That's normal pool, and then it's 1,440 feet long. That's the dam, and the height's about 18 feet tall, with an emergency spillway that's 200 feet wide, and a 36-inch principal spillway pipe going through the embankment, and it was constructed as a high hazard dam. Just some few slides of the dam for those of you that may not be familiar with the dam. This is standing on the dam looking at the riser and the permanent pool or reservoir there. This is the reservoir, a little close up of that. There is a little gazebo between the embankment and the auxiliary spillway. This is the outlet pipe below the embankment. It exits to downstream. This is the 200 feet wide auxiliary spillway. That's the safety notch around the dam. And this is a picture of showing the concrete channel improvements downstream. As Dave mentioned, there's about 2 miles of concrete channel work also associated with flood control in this watershed. Regarding the condition or current status of the dam, it's inspected annually and regularly mowed and maintained, so the town's doing a nice job of that. So some breach inundation mapping was done all the way back to 2015 and by Civil Dynamics. And the assessment that was done in 2017 found 2 primary issues that needed to be dealt with. The auxiliary spillway has insufficient capacity, and the auxiliary spillway is susceptible to erosion during the design flow events. And the sponsors are responsible for meeting the dam safety regulations for high hazard dams and addressing these deficiencies. So the New Jersey dam safety folks are looking at these types of dams and saying, you need to bring them up to current standards. Sponsors did request federal assistance in 2017, the funding in 2018, and the contract was awarded for planning in May of last year. So scoping, when we enter into a project, we take a look at all the different environmental laws and executive orders and so forth. And the scope of a project is basically defined by the Council on Environmental Quality as the range of actions, alternatives, and impacts that will be considered in a planning project. So scoping is used to identify the significant issues to be analyzed in detail and to eliminate from study the issues that are not significant. So we don't want to just be studying everything. We got to narrow it down into what's actually relevant to the project. So back in June of last year, we had a meeting in the town center there and identified through scoping the relevant resource issues that would be studied in detail. We grouped those into resource issues or resource concerns for soil, water, air, plants, animals, and humans. And again, we asked the question, is it relevant, yes or no, to the proposed action? So what I'm going to do now is go through and talk about some of those findings in relation to those resource issues that were considered to be significant during scoping. So some of the environmental findings, and thanks to ERM and EA for all their work on the environmental analysis, digging around through different databases for this information. The soils, the prime farmland soils and soils with statewide importance are in the project area. And I've highlighted project area because there's an area of initial assessment when you start these things. And then we narrow that down to what we consider the limits of disturbance. So you'll hear these terms a little bit later, but initially you have to sort of look at the overall watershed, upstream and downstream. That's considered the project area, but the limits of disturbance will be the area. Later on, you'll see that come up. Water quality, the lake and pond run are listed as impaired water bodies by the state for total suspended solids and turbidity. There are no wild, scenic, or recreational rivers in or near the project area. And there are quite a few wetlands present in the area. And you can see the breakdown there of the different types and acreages of the wetlands. Vernal pools, there's 3 verified vernal pool locations in the vicinity and 5 potential pool locations. The dam is within the interstate coastal zone under the New Jersey's Coastal Zone Management Program, but the project site is not influenced by tidal areas. The floodplain is listed by FEMA as a special flood hazard area. And the air quality does not meet the pollutant for ozone and is thus considered a non-attainment area. Plants, there are no federally threatened endangered species plants in the project area, and there are no state listed endangered plant species. Noxious weeds and invasive plant species, and we're talking about in the entire state of New Jersey, there are 5 prohibited weed species and 19 restricted weed species. No unusual fish and wildlife. Animals, only thing we found is 1 federally listed T&E species, northern long-eared bat, but that's typical for most areas in the whole Northeast. So that's not unusual to find that come up and be flagged. And again, the statewide database for species, several bird species are either in the endangered, threatened, special concern, and there are 8 reptile and amphibian species that are species of special concern. And some volunteers in the area have observed 2 special species of concern that are Fowler's toad and eastern box turtle. And there's also prime habitat for the endangered wood turtle. But keep in mind that there was not a detailed site assessment done or conducted, overall. A lot of these are desktop kind of analyses to determine what we should expect in the general area. Continuing on with this, no known invasive fish or wildlife species upstream of the impoundment within Pond Run or Veterans Lake. Bald eagles have occasionally been observed, but we did not find any nest sites within the project site. Social and cultural resources. There are 2 historic districts and 5 historic properties, and at least 11 archaeological resources within 2-mile radius of the project area. And consultation will be initiated soon with the various federal and state environmental agencies using the limits of disturbance. Following this meeting, these letters will be going out to the federal and state environmental agencies. Recreation, we found, is extensive in the park. Anytime you go out there, you can see that it's being extensively used. 2 large parking lots, athletic fields, picnic areas, biking, hiking trails, dog parks, playgrounds, athletic fields. It's very heavily used. The dam is located in the middle of the park, and it is not a federally designated park or a natural area, but it is listed on the New Jersey Association webpage as some of the great trails in New Jersey. So it is significant from a local use standpoint. The visual aesthetics and scenic beauty, park has impacts, we know, on tourism, recreation, and the resident satisfaction. There is value associated with the dam and the lake for scenic beauty and outdoor activities. We also took a look at the environmental justice and civil rights issues in the area. You can see a breakdown of the diversity with race and ethnicity. The area also within the breach inundation zone, there is lower per capita income, higher level of poverty, and lower medium household income. We're talking specifically within the breach inundation zone, that area that would be potentially impacted if the dam were to breach. The watershed was modeled with the dam in place and the dam removed. So here's what we found. The flooding impacts to downstream properties. Right now, there are 853 houses and 4 apartment complexes downstream of the dam. 49 commercial buildings, 10 public buildings, for a total of over 900 buildings impacted by flooding in those downstream properties. So if you compare that without the dam, there's a lot more damages than with the dam in place. There's still damages, and we're primarily talking about all flood events. So these can be, to different buildings, roads and crossings. It also includes any vehicles that would be parked in those areas downstream. So the benefits of the dam right now, you're getting flood reduction to those 916 buildings, 64 different roadways, that's public and private, and 8 stream crossings. So there's almost $400 average annual benefits associated with this dam. So now I'm going to turn it over to Peter Maspus with Atera Solutions, and he's going to take control and talk more specifically about the modeling and the work done on the dam upstream and downstream.
All right, sounds good. I have control now, so move forward and discuss some of the analyses that we performed as part of this project. All these analyses were either performed in support of the economic analysis or in support of the rehabilitation of the dam and development of the alternatives. So the first thing that we looked at, or one of the first things, was evaluating the watershed area. You can see a image overlaid with the current watershed delineation, which is shown in yellow. And you can see that the drainage area has been reduced slightly, and that's mostly because of the availability of more accurate terrain data, and potentially to some effects of urbanization, which might have changed drainage patterns in the watershed. We also looked at runoff curve numbers, which essentially define how much volume is conveyed to the dam from the watershed. We looked at existing conditions and then also future build-out conditions, which were calibrated based on land use or zoning restrictions in the watershed. We evaluated time of concentration because the watershed is a lot more urbanized than it was back in the 60s when the dam was constructed. So that shows the longest flow path essentially from the headwaters all the way to the dam. And we also obviously looked at rainfall data and other parameters that may have changed since the time the dam was constructed. And the results of the analysis showed that several NRCS criteria are not met, and confirmed that the dam is in need of rehabilitation. Good news is that the dam is not overtopped during the design event. So that kind of drove our analysis or alternatives evaluation. But we confirmed that the oxygen spillway breaches during the design event. And we also confirmed that one of the NRC's criteria for principal spillway capacity and flood storage are not met. So that also needed to be addressed as part of the rehabilitation design. We also performed a bathymetric survey and sediment survey in the reservoir to evaluate the stage storage, the current stage storage relationship, and to also see whether the dam has capacity for future sedimentation. And the results of the survey showed that there is additional capacity for at least another 57 years, and therefore we're not recommending sediment removal at this time. And I'm going to turn it over to Paul Welle.
Thank you very much, Peter. It's good to be with you this evening. I'm Paul Welle with Schnabel Engineering, and I am also a retired NRCS engineer. So I've worked at various times on various aspects of the Assunpink watershed for a number of years. And I was just looking at the number of participants of this event a minute ago and recognized several names of people with whom I've worked in the past. So it's good to be with you all tonight. In addition to the hydrologic and hydraulic analyses that Peter just described, we also performed an on-site geotechnical investigation of the embankment and the auxiliary spillway. And especially, this is in essence an underground investigation where we had 8 borings that we drilled and 7 test pits. We looked at 2 locations, and primarily within the embankment, both the maximum section, in other words, the tallest section of the dam near where the original stream channel crossed, as well as adjacent to the principal spillway. And we installed 4 piezometers in the embankment to continue to monitor seepage. And we took the results of that, some of which we actually did some testing in the field and additional testing in a laboratory. After we had all the test results, we performed a geotechnical analysis. One of the things we looked at is what we call the filter compatibility. And what we have is we have toe drains or embankment drains near the toe of the dam. And that's because most dams have some type of seepage through the dams. The question is how much. Now, these toe drains actually are intended to intercept this any seepage through the embankment so that it would not cause any problem as far as stability of the dam. And one way to keep the soil from moving through these filter drains is to have a 2-stage toe drain filter. And these stages of sand and gravel are intended to keep the soil where it's at, but still allow the water to flow through it. We found that this filter drain system meets the criteria that was in existence at the time the dam was originally built. The criteria have become more stringent, but it still meets the older criteria, even though it would not meet the existing criteria. But observing from what we can see, it appears that these filter drains are functional, and as a result, we do not consider repair to them to be warranted. However, we do recommend routine monitoring of the embankment and the toe drain outlets for any changes. And if there's any construction of the dam, we would recommend that the toe drains be realigned to the point where additional observation of them can be performed. We saw no significant issues as far as seepage through the embankment. We did 2 types of slope stability analyses. One was a static condition, and it meets all of current criteria for slope stability. We also did an analysis of what would happen if the dam was in existence when an earthquake occurred. And we found that it meets all of the criteria with regard to that also. We took a look at the riser. You've seen this photo of the principal spillway riser before. We did a visual inspection of the riser and found it to be in generally good condition with no observed structural or performance concerns as far as the riser itself. We did a separate analysis of whether it would be stable under earthquake conditions and found that it meets all of the current design criteria with regard to seismic stability. We do have one recommendation. If you see on the left-hand side, just above the water, you see a rectangular opening or orifice. And this is what maintains the water at the normal pool elevation. And we do recommend that a trash rack be installed on there so that trash would not get into the riser and cause any plugging of the riser itself. This is the impact basin or outlet of the principal spillway conduit. It is a concrete structure that is in good condition. You do see, though, that in the stilling basin in the foreground, you see some riprap in that stilling basin, and that riprap should be removed. We performed, in addition to evaluating the riser, we also put a camera, a TV camera, up through the conduit itself and found it to be in good condition, that the joints are tight, that it has fared well over the years that it's been in service. We also used a similar camera to look at the tow drains, and we could look at the portion of the tow drains that are parallel to this spillway, but then there are a couple right-hand bends in the tow drains, and we could not actually look at them. Here's an outlet of the tow drain. You can see there is some water coming out of it, but it's clear. That's a good indication that, in fact, it's not carrying any soil with it. But you'll notice that there's no animal guard on it, and it should have an animal guard. We also just looked around at the area, at the vegetation. You can see in the auxiliary spillway, there are some bare areas that where the grass should be replaced. There is some erosion along the side of the auxiliary spillway inlet. Some superficial erosion of the upstream side of the embankment, a few animal burrows, and then finally, here's a photo of the stream downstream of the dam. And you can see that it's a beautiful natural condition there, and there are no major issues with regard to that. So I'm going to turn it back over to Wade for his continued discussion.
Okay, thanks, Paul and Peter. And what I'm going to cover now is a little bit just to talk about auxiliary spillway flow. This is just a shot of a spillway up in Pennsylvania back in 2006. You can see this is a spillway that's flowing a few feet deep through here. It looks like it's functioning properly and everything works just great until you can see at the end it starts chewing and eating its way back through the dam. And if that flow was really coming fast, it would create lots of problems downstream and eat its way back into the structure. Here's another auxiliary spillway breach up in Massachusetts in 2011. Granville Dam, and you can see this is actively flowing here. It's eating away. Here's as the water's receding a little bit, and you can see how much damage is caused there. So this can happen. It can cause the dam to fail, and depending on how rapid or severe this is, it can cause devastating impacts downstream. So now I want to go into alternatives. We're going to transition a little bit into, we've talked about the existing conditions of the dam, the different components of the dam, environmental, social, engineering. And now I want to talk about what we've considered for alternatives to rehabilitate the dam. Some of these we considered but eliminated from detailed study. And here's some of the reasons for that. We talked about, well, can we raise the dam or the crest of the auxiliary spillway? But this option really didn't make sense because the auxiliary spillway, we determined, had capacity to pass the freeboard hydrograph, which is a 6-hour probable maximum flood, but it doesn't meet the stability integrity criteria. Basically what that says is it would erode through the auxiliary spillway during that design storm. So raising the auxiliary spillway of the top of dam would also have negative effect on the upstream property. So that was eliminated. We did not want to raise the top of dam or the crest of the auxiliary spillway. We also looked at decommissioning, and that would all include addressing any induced damages to downstream properties, roadways, and crossings. So with those 916 buildings, and you saw the number of roadways and crossings, that was calculated to be greater than $30 million. So we eliminated that for exorbitant cost. The non-structural alternatives would look at elevating, flood-proofing, or relocating downstream properties, and elevating or modifying those roadways and stream crossings. And we determined that was exorbitant as well. with a neighborhood of somewhere around 220 to $230 million. So that was just not something we wanted to consider. We also looked at the existing auxiliary spillway to look at articulated concrete blocks. And that's they take these blocks and cable them together and make blankets and basically cable those together. And you have an armored blanket over the auxiliary spillway. But the dam doesn't meet the criteria for flood storage and the principal spillway capacity. So it would require raising the auxiliary spillway crest in this case. So we also said that wasn't reasonable, and this requirement can be waived for structural spillways. However, the articulated concrete blocks cannot be considered a structural solution by NRCS policy. So we've eliminated those options. So then we started looking, I'll talk a little bit about, if you look at the middle left of your screen, that little box. Aqua line around, we did an analysis to determine what's the existing elevation of the auxiliary spillway. That aqua line, the light blue line, is the existing auxiliary spillway crest. The dark blue line shows where it will go all the way up to the top of dam. So if you start looking up in the sort of the center, right center page, you can see where the top of dam elevation starts getting into a lot of roads, a lot of homes. And so we had to take a look at that and determine, in a worst case scenario, what kind of impacts will we have here. So here's what we looked at from a land rights or an easements kind of issue. And for the original construction back in 1967, the town purchased or acquired land or easements to the crest of the auxiliary spillway elevation. And in today's elevations, that's 73 feet. So we had our economist did a flood pool risk analysis, was performed for all areas below the top of dam. And we determined that no floodwater impacts to habitable dwellings below the 1,000-year event. So you could have a very large storm and you would not be backing water upstream of the dam into people's homes. So a 1,000-year event. But if it went all the way to the top of dam, and this is the worst case scenario, there would be 55 houses, 5 public buildings, and 2 commercial properties impacted at the top of dam. So we'll talk about that a little bit later. We also looked through the updated watershed modeling. It was determined that the 100-year 24-hour storm level upstream of the dam was actually higher than the crest of the auxiliary spillway elevation. So if you look at those 2 highlighted numbers there, the crest of the auxiliary spillway at 73 feet and the 100-year 24-hour storm is about a foot higher. And by NRCS policy, it requires the minimum land rights for dam rehabilitation to be the crest of the auxiliary spillway elevation or the 100-year 24-hour storm elevation, whichever is higher. And so since the 100-year 24-hour storm elevation is higher than the current land rights easements, this would require the town to acquire about 5.86 acres of additional flood easements. There's some additional land upstream of the dam that would be in this zone, but the town already owns that land. So the 5.86 acres is right now what would be required to meet the minimum NRCS policy. And the town will have to decide whether to acquire land rights above that 100-year 24-hour storm or to accept the risk of flooding to the top of dam. And going back to up there to the second bullet, or actually the first sub bullet out there, we determined that there were no impacts to habitable dwellings below the 1,000-year storm. So that's a very, very good thing. Even though there are potential impacts, we're still protected up to the 1,000-year storm. So now we've talked about stuff that we've eliminated and considered, but now talking about the alternatives that were evaluated and analyzed in detail. So we looked in any of these projects, you look at no action. What if the federal government is not involved? What if there's no federal funding for dam rehab? What would the local sponsors do to try to address these issues? So we considered the no action, and we'll talk about that in a little bit. But we also looked at one of the key ones was to look at armoring the existing auxiliary spillway. And one way of doing that is with roller compacted concrete. That's a little easier to handle. It's not as much forming involved with that. So roller compacted concrete in the existing auxiliary spillway for armoring. We also looked at a straight drop concrete spillway over the top of the dam. And this would involve, a berming up the existing spillway and just building a spillway over the top of the dam. And the other alternative was to look at a labyrinth weir, and Peter's going to go into a little bit more detail on some of these in a minute, but the labyrinth weir concrete spillway over the top of the dam. And that would again be berming up the existing auxiliary spillway. So those are the 4 alternatives that we analyzed in detail, and I'm going to turn it to Peter, who's going to go into some of the conceptual design of those alternatives.
Thank you, Wade. So moving to alternative 1, which was the roll compacted concrete protection of the auxiliary spillway. So this alternative resembles the existing conditions the best. You're essentially doing most of the work within the auxiliary spillway crest, auxiliary spillway, which is shown on the left side of the drawing, and we propose to armor the control section and the exit channel of the auxiliary spillway, and also the side slopes of the spillway. Once the roller compacted concrete is placed, we'll also add topsoil to the spillway, and that would be seeded to improve the visual appearance of the spillway. Paul talked about the geotechnical analysis that was performed, and the fact that there was no need to install the filter diaphragm was not quite required back then, but it would be required under the current criteria. There was a way to request a waiver from this particular requirement, but we also proposed to show where the filter diaphragm would be installed and the replacement of the tow drains as well. On the next slide, you can see an example of how an RCC spillway would likely look like, except in this picture from Georgia, you don't have the topsoil covering the concrete. This next slide shows the profile along the auxiliary spillway center line. You can see on the left side of the upper image, you can see the control section, and then further down you can see the steps. And just gonna move to the next alternative. So alternative 2, as Wade pointed out, was a straight drop spillway through the main dam embankment. The width of the spillway would be 160 feet. We have to excavate or remove the existing stilling basin and excavate along the entire width of the straight drop spillway. We'd also have to construct a berm in the existing auxiliary spillway to prevent any flow leaving in that direction, because remember that spillway is vulnerable to breaching. And we would also construct a pedestrian bridge over the weir, so the dam or the park can continue to be utilized the way it is utilized now. You do actually have a similar type of structure in the Assunpink Creek watershed. It's actually incorrect. It should be number 6 dam. But it is this particular structure is much wider and more robust than what would be the alternative for dam number 8. Here's another profile of the alternative. You can see on the left side, you can see the existing spillway riser. We have to excavate the approach, build the weir, and then remove the existing principal spillway conduit on the downstream side, including the impact basin. And moving on to the third alternative, which was evaluated in detail, is the so-called labyrinth weir. It's very similar to the second alternative that we just went over, with the exception that the width of the labyrinth would be narrower, about 110 feet, and that's due to the configuration of the labyrinth weir. I mean, you can see that the labyrinth has the ability to convey a lot more flow through the spillway. The labyrinth weir would be staged, so one of the cycles would be lower than the higher one, and that's really to accomplish the same flow through the spillway during the 10, 20, 50-year events when the spillway is engaged. So it was meant to accomplish the same flood protection downstream without compromising or without changing any upstream impacts. And the next slide shows an example of a labyrinth that was constructed recently in Virginia. You can see that this particular one doesn't have a pedestrian bridge over it. I assume there was no need for that, but we would also be installing a bridge over the weir at Assunpink Creek watershed dam number 8. And you can see a profile of this particular alternative. At the center, you can see the weir. On the upstream, an approach to the weir, and on the downstream, you can see the chute with protection of the outlet pipe. And I think I'm going to turn it over to Wade so he can talk about the limits of disturbance and access points to the area.
Okay, thanks, Peter. I spoke about the project area earlier, and this is what we've narrowed down to be the limits of disturbance. And in the top left center there, you can see the parking lot area over there near the hospital. That's crosshatch, black crosshatching there. That would be one of the staging areas that would be used for equipment and materials, and they would have access to the dam, to that side of the dam, through that staging area. At the lower part of the screen, you can see the other black crosshatched area. This is the original area that was used for staging and borrow and construction of the dam back in 1967. We would also utilize that area again as for staging of materials and so forth, and it will give access to the other side of the dam or the other side of the principal spillway, so that you could have access from both sides. The area that you see on the left center of the screen, that the little access road, it was the original road that was used for construction. That would be upgraded and improved, and a new stream crossing culvert there installed to improve that access. But again, this was used in the original construction. So these are previously impacted areas already. So we feel like that this was the best option that would allow us to have the least amount of impact to the other parts of the park that would potentially be impacted if we came in through other points. So these are the limits of disturbance right now. You can see the general center of the area is the embankment and the auxiliary spillway. Certainly those would be impacted with this new project. So comparing cost right now for the different options, the no action, what the town decided to do is said, we're going through a planning process here. So if we have no federal funding going forward, we would consider at least looking at the cheapest or least cost alternative if there were no federal assistance. So that's the no action. So they've selected the same alternative that's basically the federal action or the recommended alternative here. So the roller compacted concrete in existing auxiliary spillway is about 5.7 million. The drop spillway over the dam is about right around 5 million, and the labyrinth weir over the dam is around 3.7 million. So that is the least cost alternative right now. And when you look at the recommended alternative based on the guidelines that we have right now, the National Economic Development Plan is the federally assisted alternative with the greatest net economic benefits. So if the sponsor wants to utilize NRCS assistance with rehabilitation, the National Economic Development Plan must be the selected alternative. So that is our recommended alternative, is that labyrinth weir over the dam. The federal cost would be for construction would be 65% of total project cost. And that does include the construction, engineering, land rights, contract administration. Everything is within that total project cost. It's not just the construction. And then the non-federal cost would be 35% of that. So moving on, some of the environmental effects, and we're getting close to the end here, so hang with us. Keep in mind here that we're evaluating the existing conditions that already has a dam in place. We felt like that this qualified for a categorical exclusion or an environmental evaluation rather than environmental assessment or environmental impact study. So we are modifying the original footprint of the dam, and these impacts are changes with the dam in place, not a new dam. So some of the environmental resources that are located within that limits of disturbance that we showed you, there's about 2.36 acres of prime farmland, about 7. And we're not saying that all these acres would be impacted, it's just within that limits of disturbance, those lines that we drew. And a lot of these, again, have already been impacted by the original construction. Wetland types, about 0.73 acres. And you can see broken down below there, the types of wetlands that would be potentially impacted. Recreational land, about 7.7 acres. And some transportation, communication different The other one, environmental effects and impacts. There are 5 different ranks of endangered, threatened species habitats, and we're glad to report that there's nothing within the highest ranked 4 and 5 ranked areas. There are no impacts to those areas, and you can see that the different areas that would be potentially impacted broken down there for ranks 1, 2, and 3. We mentioned earlier the federally listed threatened species of the northern long-eared bat, but the impacts, we feel like we can't avoid them with time of year restrictions for any tree removal or areas that would be impacted there. So that's a good thing. Some local issues to consider during construction. The parking lot would be closed on the White Horse Hamilton Square Road. We would require access to both sides of the dam on both sides of the stream, because as we're building the Labyrinth Weir, you would have to have access to both sides. So we need 2 staging areas. And that we mentioned that parking lot and the old staging borrow area. Then the large trucks would be in the area hauling materials, supplies, concrete, cement, things like that. And for the public at large, the construction areas and parts of the Veteran Park would be closed for one construction season. So we felt like that those were the issues that would be more local in nature. For the planning schedule here, we're getting close to completing the evaluation of alternatives. You've got another couple weeks on that. The town will accept comments on these recommendations for about another month, and we'll go into that. I'll give you the details on that in a minute. Then we're talking about the preparation of a document, a supplemental plan to the original plan. That will be, there are different phases of that, but it will be finished up in February of next year. So there's internal reviews, there's technical reviews by NRCS staff out of Little Rock. They have a water management center there. And then we would incorporate those comments into a final plan and then have signatures and approvals. And so that process will be finished up by February of next year. And then going on forward, assuming that that project gets funded, design would take about 1 year and construction about 1 year. So for the general public and the other agencies that are out there, if we do need any other information that's available that we may have overlooked or didn't know about, or it's not publicly available at this point. So we're asking for people to write or email to Richard Williams, the municipal engineer. I've given his email and physical address information there. The meeting tonight has been recorded and the PowerPoint will be posted to the town's website for reference and information on details that if you need to talk with neighbors or friends or whatever, let them know. They can go back and review it and listen to the presentation. So that's it. We thank everyone for your participation and input and assistance with the development of the plan. And that concludes our remarks. So I am going to, I guess, Peter, if you want to take the presentation down, I guess we'll go at this time, we'll go to the chat room to see if anybody has recorded any comments or questions during the all right, so how do we, Peter, you want to take down the presentation?
Yeah, I can do that. Let me see.
Trying to, there we go. I'm gonna stop presenting. There we go. I think we got it now.
So we don't have any written questions, but I already see someone having a question for us. I would not want to
No, we're not
mispronounce the name, but it's is it Haig Kasbach?
Okay, so
you
go
can
ahead and unmute yourself and let us know what question or comment you have.
Can you hear me?
Yes.
Has the spillway ever been used? I live nearby there, and I can't recall any time water has been through there. Hello?
I will let Rich or Dave answer that question. I'm not aware of any flow through the auxiliary spillway at this point.
Yeah, and this is Dave Lamb, state engineer. Yeah, I don't know that we've recorded any spillway flows either during, say, Hurricane Irene. That might have been one of the stronger storms in recent memory in the area. I'm not aware that that spillway flowed. There were others in the Assunpink that did, but not that one. Rich, unless you have other information.
Yeah, this is Rich Williams. We've had several, and I can remember one in April not too long ago. And I think it was after I'm trying to think of which one of the Hurricane Irene. I think it was. We had a tremendous rainfall. I don't ever remember that spillway ever being inundated. So as far as I know, it has not happened, but that doesn't mean it may not happen.
So that we've already gone through the 100-year storm and above. So I don't know how that calculation was made.
Correct.
Well, I mean, it's a little bit more complicated. And, you know, I don't know what frequency was Hurricane Irene in that particular watershed. Remember that, you know, when you're modeling watersheds using synthetic events, it's kind of like the best estimate that you can have to estimate the runoff. I also like to point out actually that, our results match very closely with the FEMA water surface profile along Pond Run. It's within, I think, almost 2/100 of a foot. So, that's all I can say.
Okay. All right. If you did your calculations, it just didn't seem like it was necessary, but okay.
Well, also, the other important aspect is the fact that, the dam is designed for it should be designed according to the dam safety criteria. It should be designed for the problem maximum precipitation event, which is, potentially the worst case scenario. And the spillway should, one, have the capacity to convey that flow, which we have shown that it does, but it also cannot breach during the event because, as we have shown as part of the analysis, the impacts would be downstream would be significant, and that's what would happen right now if the dam is not rehabbed to meet the dam safety criteria.
Okay, thank you.
You're welcome. So wait, the next person that I see that has raised their hand is Michael Gann. So please go ahead and ask the question.
This is Ames Hoyt, and I'm with Michael Gann. I have observed the breaching of the spillway on 2 or 3 occasions. And one of them, I believe, was in 2007. I may be wrong, but I mean, this is a while back, so my memory doesn't always serve me right. But I know I've seen it firsthand that the spillway has been breached, and I would say in the last 10 to 15 years, 2 or 3 times. The other time was, I think, in 2011 and perhaps in 2012. And all 3 of those events, although I am not an expert, I believe that they were not 100-year storms. In addition, I understand that there is apparently some kind of erosion problem with the spillway. Can everybody hear me? Is that better? Okay. So
yes, we can hear you.
Okay, great. Thank you. There is an erosion problem with the spillway. I understand that. And my question would be, what is causing that? Is that something that's going on upstream with the way with the increase in impervious surface and perhaps some additional stormwater management issues? That's a question. Does anybody want to answer that? I mean, what is causing that erosion? It's been good, apparently, I would imagine from 1967 until up until relatively recently, there's been an erosion. There's now an erosion issue. What's causing that?
Where's the erosion happening? I think Paul showed some pictures of areas in the auxiliary spillway that apparently there's some acidic type soils that we're seeing there, but that would be addressed with the rehab option that's being considered. But we also saw some erosion around I would say around like the wave berm or the area along the upstream sort of reservoir soil surface line.
Right.
So there might be some areas there that's experienced a lot more erosion, but I don't know if that's more of a flash flooding kind of thing where you're getting a more runoff, or if it's Dave, maybe you have a
I don't know for sure, but in part the water has been held up longer because of that small orifice that Paul pointed out. Doesn't have a trash rack, and it routinely clogs with debris. And I think that's holding the water up longer than it normally would have in the past. So when there's a trash rack back in place on that, it may help alleviate some of that.
Right. So what happens would be as water accumulates perhaps more frequently, that would soften up the soils a bit, and then that would allow for, perhaps because the soils are softer, to allow for erosion. So that's what you think what's happening at this point, and that's what would, if I understand this correctly, is this need for a labyrinth weir. Why are we going with this labyrinth weir when perhaps we might be able to address some of these erosion concerns with alternatives?
The reason we're going to a labyrinth weir is for the protection from storms that would be much larger than what we've observed to date.
Okay.
When we talk about breaching a dam, we define breaching the dam as to when there would be so much erosion through the auxiliary spillway that the pool itself would be at least partially drained. And I think in what we're talking about here, as far as observed erosion, it's for much smaller events than that. So this labyrinth spillway would be designed to safely carry the water from these large storms, something that we often call the probable maximum flood, a storm that would almost overtop the dam. Right. So it would be for protection against a flood that we have not seen at this dam.
Okay, so we want to protect from larger storms, and I understand that, and I would have to say that I'm not a meteorologist, but the overall trend in the state rainfall amount averages, the annual rainfall events, they are getting higher. You probably know some of the reasons, such as climate change, so I understand that. In addition, just would like to put on for the record that we do have some stormwater challenges in Hamilton Township. And I would hope now and in the future that the NRCS and the USDA or whomever would also look at those issues in Hamilton Township. In addition, that there was some comment or something in the presentation that may comment to about perhaps looking at additional land preservation of roughly 5.86 acres. Am I correct in understanding that? Maybe I missed.
Yes.
Okay.
Yes, that was the estimated acres that the town would need to acquire upstream of the dam
Right.
to meet the minimum protection for storm. It's basically water that would be stored in the reservoir backing upstream, higher than what they currently own, those flood easements. So yes, that would be additional land that would be protected, there would not be allowed any kind of habitable dwelling or structure on those protected lands.
Is that in addition to the labyrinth weir?
Yes, that's upstream of the dam. It would be in the, up where the streams flow into the lake, in that area is where the additional acreage would be acquired.
Right. Now, I'm about to finish up here. I know it's getting late. My question would be in the dam rehabilitation, putting in the labyrinth weir. Two questions. One would be, would that require the complete draining of the lake? And because of that, there could be an impact to reptile, amphibian, fish, and what I know to be is freshwater mussel population. How would that impact the animal species, and even in the birds in that situation? As another example would be in the spillway, and I think that you've all observed that there is a purple martin house that's occupied every year from April to, well, they should be getting ready to take off back to South America right now. So is there anything that we can do for the animal species in this project? I'm concerned that there's going to be an impact to various animals during the construction of the weir. What can we do to mitigate that problem?
That's a very good question, and a lot of the environmental impacts that we're considering are what we would say is more short-term, potentially adverse, but long-term negligible, because at some point the lake would be refilled. We haven't fully decided, I guess, and that may be decided in the design phase of whether it would be required to drain the lake. But I would defer, I guess, to Paul or Peter or Dave for whether or not we felt like it would be required to drain the lake, or whether it would just be lowered during construction.
Right.
Yeah, we looked at it, and we determined that it would not be required to drain the lake. I mean, you have to be lowered to some level, maybe similar to what was done as part of the CCTV inspection.
Right.
So that would lessen the impacts there, at least during the construction season.
Okay, so is there any data to support that there would be a not a full draining of the lake, and that there is a confidence level that would that the species that I had, the animal species that I had identified, would be impact to a lesser degree, and hopefully that a good portion of those would kind of make it through. There is some there's a good possibility that at least some of them would make it through. Do we have any data to support that?
Hey, wait, this is Sal DeCarli. So I'm with EA Engineering, and we were tasked with doing most of the environmental analysis for the project. As Peter had said, and Wade had also talked about, there will be some temporary drawdowns of Veterans Lake. Veterans Lake, as a flood control structure, regularly fluctuates in its water levels. And in addition, we got some information from the town that, they go out there and they exercise the valves to make sure everything's working properly. So although it is a well-established lake with habitats, that body of water and the species around it have become accustomed to fluctuations in that impoundment. So it's usually not a static water level all the time. And as Peter mentioned, they did also just do a recent drawdown for some of the inspections as well. So it is kind of a standard practice in that impoundment. The impacts to some of the species that you had mentioned are anticipated, as Wade said, to be short term during the construction period. And there could be a drawdown, possibly of 2 feet or so of the impoundment. So the reptile species, fish species, there'll still be water going into the pond. There'll also still be flow coming down from the creeks feeding into the pond as well to provide oxygenated water to some of the species as well. So undoubtedly there will be short-term impacts to some of the species, but we aren't anticipating long-term impacts because once that reservoir is raised back up, it's going to be functioning as it currently is.
Okay.
And some of the species that are currently there, as Wade stated, we will be doing consultations with the state, the Natural Heritage Program. So we send our LOD and descriptions of the project activities to those agencies so we can get feedback from those agencies now during the planning process. Right. In addition, once we actually go through the design process of the project down the road for the alternative, that we also have to go through the permitting process again. So there's several different layers for state agencies to provide us feedback on what alternatives, or what issues or mitigation measures they need us to do. And those mitigation measures will be followed so that we can so the township can obtain the permits to do the work. So this is kind of the initial planning assessment. So we do look at a lot of the concerns you have, and there will be, several layers of state regulatory review of the project before anything actually gets done on site.
Okay, so from what you said, and the fact that I'm not an expert, I am cautiously optimistic, knock on wood. The final thing is, and this is the end of my, is that when the weir goes in, will there be any removal of sedimentation in that lake? And what will happen to it? And how will it be managed? Will it be dewatered? And then when it's brought off, as it's being brought out, that it's brought out in a manner where there's not a drag out problem either in the park or the surrounding streets.
I don't believe, but Peter, correct me if I'm wrong, I don't believe right now that we're currently anticipating having to dredge sediments within the pond to facilitate construction.
Okay, and just for the record, I want to finish up right now, and that is, I identified myself. I'm with Michael Gann of Lieberman and Blecker. As I said, I'm Ames Hoyt, but I'm with Save. I'm speaking, questioning with as a Save. He's representing Save Hamilton Open Space. Thank you. I appreciate your presentation tonight. Very informative. Thank you.
Thank you, Michael. Good comments, good discussion, and Sal, thanks for jumping in there. I think we have Peter. You can see the screens or know who has their hand raised.
Yep. I would just like to add. We're not proposing to remove any sediment from the reservoir or the dam, and whatever excavation will occur within the embankment will be spoiled within the auxiliary spillway and used for the berm that needs to be constructed. So that's our goal, and it was incorporated into the preliminary design. So the next person, I guess it's Haig again, has a question. So please go ahead.
Yeah, the 5+ acres that are in part of the design here, is that included in the cost? And are there homes involved in that? And is that part of the federal share too?
There are no homes involved in that. It's just different parcels of land that would be fairly close or adjacent to the water bodies. And it would be an extension of the existing easements up into those parcels. So it would just be existing land that is not it does not have any habitable dwellings on it right now.
So that's included in the cost of the project?
Yes,
okay.
Yes, it is. Yes.
Okay, thank you.
All right, so we're going back to, I'm sorry, I don't recall your name, but you're under the Michael Gann logo.
Yes, it's Ames Hoy. Just real quick, I mentioned the breaching of the spillway, and that was back tax day. It would be April 15th and 16th of 2007. I believe that's when the breach was. So that was it was probably one of the fourth rainiest Aprils in the history of the state in 4 years of record keeping, but it was not a 100-year event. And there were, as I said, at least one or two other events where it was breached and others coming very close. So it's very interesting what you're saying about that there's probably another 57 years of sediment capacity, if I understood that correctly in the presentation. So what I'm wondering is, as sedimentation grows in that lake, which it has, I've noticed that it's really accelerated, what that means in terms of more active use in the spillway.
So when you say the spillway breached, you mean that there was flow in the spillway, right?
Yeah, absolutely.
Okay.
Absolutely. It was pretty impressive. It wasn't just a trickle. It was a sheet flow through the spillway, nearly in the entire width. And what it did is it breached, it went over the top of this side spillway. And as you put it, there's a notch in the dam. And it went through there, it went all the way down into the wetlands area where there's, as you probably are aware of, there's this wetland boardwalk or walkway. It went right into that. It did not go into, as I recollect, Whitehorse Hamilton Square Road.
Okay.
But it breached it clearly.
Right. So I guess that, just it's maybe just the term, but we don't consider that as a breach of the spillway. When we talk about a breach, it's really a result of a significant flow through the spillway when a headcut is formed at the, downstream toe and progresses further upstream to the point that, it's at the upstream end of the control section. And that moment you have all this great amount of storage behind the dam and the additional flow during the PMF event just flowing down without being retarded by the dam itself. But anyway, I understand that
going around the dam. So I'm trying to understand this. It's not overtopping. And maybe are you talking about overtopping? Because it wasn't overtopping. It was going around through that notch, if you will, that kind of that 200-foot area. That's right. The sheet flow is through. So
right. That is the auxiliary spillway where that flow should be going. And right now, based on the models that we have, it does show that it flows during the 100-year event, which is 1% annual chance of occurrence. It flows during the 50-year event as well. And I believe it does flow during the 20 or 25-year event as well.
That's correct. And that's what that event, I believe in April of 2007, depending on where you were in the watershed, it was anywhere from a 10 to approximately 30 or 35-year event. So anyway, thank you.
Right. And I mean, that's not surprising because even last year when we were trying to, I believe this was last year and this year, we're trying to conduct the CCTV inspection. There was some rain, there were rainy days, 2 or 3 rainy days, and it seems like the watershed is very flashy and the reservoir rises quite quickly. But anyway, to answer your question regarding the sediment storage, when we're talking about additional 57 years of sediment storage, that's below the normal pool. And so that's not considered, flood water retarding storage. So it wouldn't really have it wouldn't impact any, the frequency of the spillway being engaged, or, it wouldn't affect the frequency of flooding downstream for at least another 57 years based on the analysis we had performed.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Or do we have any other questions? If there are no other questions, Rich, I'll turn it back to you and Dave for your closing comments.
Okay, I like to thank Wade, Peter, and Paul for that.
Hi, I'm sorry. This is Jeff from Congressman Smith's office. Can you hear me?
Yes, we can.
Yes.
I'm calling in on a phone line, but I appreciate the presentation, and of course the mayor and Rich Williams hosting, and the state and federal officials coming together to make this public presentation. I had just 2 questions. One, when you talked about the length of construction and design, did I hear you right to say that the design was a 1-year period and construction was also a 1-year period?
Yes, that's what we have planned for right now.
And if that 1 year of construction, is that 2 construction seasons? How long is construction season in your guidance?
Well, right now we think if we started the solicitation and bidding process in the fall or winter months, that we could have a contract awarded maybe by March or April, and that you would then go into the construction period. The season would start somewhere, say March or April, and be completed by October, November, or maybe December at the latest. So that would be the construction season.
I see. And with that, I had a separate question about the plan that you spoke of that's going to be posted on the township website for the public. I was wondering if a set of those plans could be made available at the township library. We have some constituents who, senior citizens, et cetera, who do not use the internet or websites and might be more comfortable at the library. And we've seen the Army Corps of Engineers do that for projects, construction projects on and around the Joint Base, the Guardics Lakehurst. I was wondering if it'd be possible to have a set of the proposal with the alternatives that you've just laid out printed and given to the library reference section in Hamilton.
Rich, I guess that would be something that potentially we could copy put a copy or 2 of the PowerPoint presentation at the library. That certainly would be doable. Once the final, I would say the plan is put together, it becomes a public document, and we could put a copy of the final plan that would, lay out all these different details and description of findings and alternatives and, effects and those kinds of things. all that would be included in the plan. And so once that is finalized, that could certainly be put into all the public libraries and available at in the town hall or anywhere locally there.
Okay, great. Is that you? Is that Wade?
Yes, it is.
Now?
Yes.
Wade, one last question about the construction timeline. If all goes according to plan and you go out to bid for proposals, how soon would the project be put out the bid, construction, and then completed? If you can just give us a time frame, first quarter 2022 or et cetera.
Well, I would say probably best case scenario is that the final plan would be completed in February. You would probably have that plan normally would go to the national office of the agency NRCS in Washington for authorization and approval, which basically opens up the door for funding to be approved for the design and construction phases. So that process for authorization of the plan takes a month or so. So if that runs into maybe March or April of next year, and then if the town were to submit a request to NRCS for design assistance and funding, that may take a few months. If you know, it would just depend on how fast those bureaucratic wheels move. But I would say probably the design would not be finished any earlier than the winter of 21 or maybe the early spring of 22, and then the construction maybe in 22 or possibly 23.
Thank you. So construction would be on that timeline. Construction would be completed by sometime in 2023.
I would think that's, Dave, I'll let you jump in here or Rich, but that's what I would be thinking is we're probably looking at the design in late 21, maybe construction in 22, but more realistically, probably design in 21 and 22 and maybe construction in 23. I don't know. That's just a sort of a.
I was just looking for something general. That's fine. That's fine, Wade. Thank you.
Yeah, and I would agree with that, Wade, at this point. Yes.
It could move faster, but normally these things, I'd hate to throw out an earlier date and that just be unrealistic, because sometimes they move quicker than we think, and sometimes it's a little slower.
You also
All right,
have
thank you. Appreciate
you also have to keep in mind that this has to be funded, especially with the municipality, and it takes time before it's approved by council and the mayor. So it does take some time, and what Wade is mentioning is probably something a lot more doable.
Yeah, the federal funding is one aspect, and the non-federal funding is another. So all those things have got to come together, and you know, the design package, the bid solicitation package, and getting a contractor on board and all that, as well as all the funding, it takes time. So I would think you're probably looking at, you know, more realistically construction in 2023.
All right, thank you. No other questions at this time.
Thank you for joining us. All right. Anyone else have a question before we close it down? We're pushing, getting close to 2 hours here. So, Rich, I think we've answered all the questions and comments so far. So I'll leave it up to you and Dave to close it out.
Very good. Just make sure again, there's no one has any questions. If not, I want to thank Wade, Peter, and Paul for that wonderful presentation. I think they gave us a lot of information. I do want to encourage that there were a few questions asked this evening, but please, if you think of any others or anyone else that you know of that may have questions, please do not hesitate to forward them. If Peter, if you don't mind putting up the address again, to make sure you send it to me either at my email address, rwilliams@hamiltonnj.com, or if you want to send a hard-written comment, you can send it to my mailing address. Unfortunately, I'm trying to remember off the top of my head, but it would be at the post office, 00150 Hamilton, New Jersey. So please do not hesitate. All questions are very important. It will help the design team, and it's much appreciated. And again, I appreciate all the folks that happen to be on this call. I think we had close to 40 some participants, which is very good. So it gives a good variety of aspects, and I know it's from various DP, federal and local residents and some town officials. So thank you all very much. With that, and again, to remind you, and as you can see on the screen, please submit these by September the 12th. So there's a sufficient amount of time for the design team to respond on their end. With that, I'd like to turn it over if Dave has anything to further close out.
And the only thing I want to add is, Rich, thank you for your efforts and the efforts of the folks at Hamilton Township. Without your help in all this virtual town meeting would not have come off. I think you did a wonderful job and really appreciate it. So thank you.
Thank you. So Wade and Peter, if you, however you want to close this out.
I don't have any other comments or from my standpoint, I think it was a good discussion. Hopefully we got some good information out there, and people, again, this was recorded and the PowerPoint will be posted to the town's website. And Rich, hopefully you can make a couple of copies and get them over to the local library of the make copies of the presentation. And if folks want to view it in a hard copy, that's fine. And we'll go from here. That's all I have.
Okay. Well, thank you very much. I guess
thank you.
Thank you again. And I guess we just close it out.
All right.
All right.
Thank you.
Good night, everyone.
All right. Good night. Thank you.
Be safe.
Good night.